Hello, hello, and welcome to Journey to SEA 2024. This is Shellyan Edwards Barron, your host, a creative writing specialist, here to share with you all the wonderful joys of writing. Yeah, I know I'm saying that and I'm laughing to myself because I'm sure some of you are thinking, writing isn't fun. But the truth is, learning about writing can be fun, and that's where integrating activities and so on come in, which is the focus of my strategy where writing is concerned. I work with something called multisensory learning, and that is all about integrating activities where students can engage with writing through as many of their senses at once in a lesson, and certainly throughout the different touch points with the lesson, students are really energized and engaged with their writing. So today we're talking about the passive and active voice. We're talking about climax again with stories, and we'll talk a few details about strategies for climax in this episode today. And for those of you who are new to the series, then please do check in with SEA, the Peaceful Approach. It's a Facebook group, and all the videos are archived there so that you can go back. We're in episode 11 today, so there are 10 episodes that you can go back and take a look at. In each episode, we look at both report writing and narrative writing, giving you strategies that can help you with your child or your students. You can also check Word Coach Youth, that's a Facebook page. And all the videos are archived there. They're also on YouTube, Word Coach Limited, and they're on my website, wordcoach.com, and that's werdcoach.com, and that should give you all the videos if you've missed any. All right, those who are here with me on the live, thank you so much for taking the time. I know I'm running a bit late. I think, sometimes we need a vacation from vacation. Yesterday was a holiday, and I actually took some time off. Normally, I work through holidays. A day is a day. It's a Monday. I get stuff done, but I realized that it's also important to take a rest, take a break, and rejuvenate. So yeah, I need to rejuvenate from rejuvenation right now. But I did gather some thoughts for you because I know with the creative writing, some students really do struggle with the creative writing, especially when it comes to knowing what to write, what to include, how to get the grammar done, and all those kinds of things. So, if it's one thing that you know, as far as possible, according to our schedule, I'm going to be here with you sharing more about the creative writing. If you haven't already done so, you can download the schedule. It's on my website and it's in SEA the Peaceful Approach, so you can follow along as we go. And as usual, I'm going to begin with the report writing, and then we would move on to climax, which would be narrative writing. So today, like I said, we're looking at active and passive voice and what that is, why students need to know it, and how it can be useful in writing reports. So for simplicity today, I am just going to let me just check. All right. Yes. I'm just gonna, give some highlights from my text. When it comes to the active and passive voice, I tell you, it's one of those things that it's important for students to understand, but it's not one of the easiest things to explain. And what I usually do is when I work with it, I give students, the worksheets and all those things. And like I keep saying, if this is the first time you're hearing it, write it down. There are websites for English as a second language that give you lots and lots of grammar worksheets and different expressions and things that students can use quite effectively. And because it's catering for English as a second language, the explanations and the details are written in really user friendly language so that they work perfectly well with the primary school level student. And this is whether or not it's English as a second language for children or English as a second language for adults. The grammatical details and all those things really come in handy, and they're very helpful. So you can do a search for passive voice and active voice. That would be very helpful. If you want to get information about passive voice and active voice as they relate directly with report writing, then I would direct you to my text and you can follow along once you have the textbook. And now that the books are out, what I would be doing is, pulling details here and there from the text. And of course, the workbook and the journal would have follow on activities so that you can really and truly follow along with the lives and get the guidance that you need, plus the worksheets and so on to follow up with the text. All right, so what is active voice? What is passive voice? And why do you need it for um, the SEA? So, well, the report writing. So, we can think of voice in this situation as like, um, the relationship between the verb and the subject of the sentence. So, in order to really understand these things, students should know what the subject of a sentence is and how to identify the main verb in a sentence, right? So, that is like prerequisite information. If the child is having challenges with that, then you would need to go back to that first and make sure the child understands those things in enough detail where they can identify the main verb and be able to identify who or what is doing the action, which is the subject of the sentence. Now, in an active voice situation, the order is presented subject, verb, and rest of the sentence, right? So that means that the subject is identified, and we have a main verb, which is the action that the subject is doing. For the passive voice, the subject of the sentence comes after the verb, and the sentence is written in a way to show that something was done. This is where you get the use of the what do they call it? We use the past perfect, we use the past participle. That's the word I was looking for. Yes, so the past participle of the verb is used in this context, and we're looking at the focus then shifts from who is doing the action, which is active, and we usually have subject, verb, to who is receiving the action or simply focusing on the action being done. And that is the passive voice. So we'll get a sentence like Anderson threw the balloon. That is the active voice. So Anderson is the subject, threw would be the verb, and what was thrown would be the balloon. And if we have to convert that into the passive voice, we would say something like the balloon was thrown. We could either end there or we could say the balloon was thrown by Anderson. Now, why do we need to be able to do that kind of thing in a sentence? And this is where the relationship between the active and passive voice come in with the um, creation of reports at this level. So there will be times when a student is writing the information, presenting their report, and they may come up to a situation where all their sentences have the same structure. And remember, one of the key things was demonstrating in report writing, that is demonstrating an understanding of varying sentence structures and varying sentence types. And the creation of the passive voice is a variation in a sentence structure that also shows the student is capable of presenting the details with different grammatical points. And this creates that level of sophistication in the writing and demonstrates the student's ability and skill with the writing, which is ultimately what is being tested with report writing. We're looking at the expository writing, objective, formal kind of writing, and there are many different sentence formats and structures that are required there. So, knowing the passive voice and knowing when to use it allows students some variation and variety in their sentence structure and in the tone, which it is they're working on that formal tone. And it really helps a lot in demonstrating that ability and skill with the writing. So, we have that right at the beginning, being able to demonstrate that, um, I guess, next level exemplary kind of sentence structure, formal tone, etc., with the writing. The other thing is that a thing with report writing is being as objective as possible and giving, not really trying to point fingers and say, make it sound as if we are highlighting or advocating any one thing or the other. The point with a report is that we're really only supposed to be presenting information, and we're presenting information in an objective, non biased way so that readers could only get the information. So, the idea with the passive voice usage in a report is so that you can reduce the, I guess we could call it loosely finger pointing. Um, so, if we say, for example, and we have these structures that, Anderson is doing things, Anderson is doing this, he's doing that, he's doing the other, then we may want to avoid, pointing Anderson did this, Anderson did that. It might come across as very emphatic after a time if all the sentences are structured in that particular way. So using the passive voice allows us to reduce that kind of finger pointing atmosphere in the report, right? So far we have two reasons why we want to use the passive voice. So we want to use the passive voice because it shows, um, higher level sentence structures and an understanding of grammar and so on. We want to use it because it can help us reduce that finger pointing atmosphere in the report. And then the third and final reason is that sometimes you may not even know who did the action. So there are situations, for example, when, let's say, in the case of this balloon being thrown. So we're assuming it's, let's say, a balloon filled with water. Perhaps you did not see who threw the balloon, and they, to avoid the assumption that Anderson threw it, you could say the balloon was thrown, and when you turned, you noticed Anderson standing next to the pipe holding additional balloons in his hands. So you didn't see him fill the balloon with water and you didn't see him throw it, but this is the information that you have. You saw a balloon was thrown, and then you saw Anderson with this, what we would call incriminating evidence. So the assumptions and opinions can sneak into a situation where we don't have the exact details, but we have some information. And based on the information that we have, we might fill in the gap and then report it as fact. We do have to be careful with that. And in a situation where you may not have seen it actually go down, but you can simply state what you saw, then you can introduce concepts like passive voice, sparingly, of course, um, and relate the information in that kind of way to make the situation sound more realistic, make it conform grammatically, and as well demonstrate the child's ability to use these kinds of grammatical structures in sentences. So the whole point of passive voice is to help the writer express ideas and avoid opinions while and assumptions while demonstrating their ability to create sentence structures that are varied and more exemplary in terms of the higher level ability and higher level skill. And I'll tell you this, and I know I'm saying it and I'm going to keep repeating it over and over because it's important to recognize that while students may have that basic understanding of the report writing structure and they may have an idea of what goes into the different paragraphs and so on, what separates the student who is considered exemplary from the student who is considered proficient is their skill at sharing the information. So that a student who pretty much does what is expected of them and presents information in the organized, structured way that shows their ability at their the required level, those students are going to score on the outside around 16, maybe 17. Right? But if you want to get your child or your student into that exemplary category, then getting into that exemplary category means expressing skill in writing to demonstrate a variety of different writing structures, processes, and abilities. And that means including things like passive voice. Now, we've spoken about the organizational structure and that tone, getting that formal tone. You do want to work on, like using reported speech. All of these things give students a bit of an edge because then they're demonstrating their skill and ability to weave all of these strategies into the presentation of a report. So, yes, you need the basic understanding and the basic skill, which is what you would get when you go through the practice and so on, but you also need to recognize those additional skills that may or may not be present in your child's writing. And these are the things that you need to check for. And if they are not present, then here is where, if your student or your child is stuck between 14 and 16, these are the little extra things that are going to help them get to that 18 to 20, because they will be demonstrating that higher level thinking, higher level writing skill, and they will get into the exemplary category. So, yes, we have to make sure that the, beginning, middle, end, we have some details, have the experiences and all those things, but we also need to be mindful that this is an exam. And again, this is something that I'll keep repeating because it's an exam. Examiners are looking for specific things, and we really want to demonstrate those writing skills. So, when it comes to the passive voice, why would you use passive voice in a report? In general, we want to demonstrate our writing skills. But more specifically, there may be situations in the report where, one, you don't know who the subject is, you just know something was done, but you don't know who did the action. That's when passive voice would come into play. Two, if you have been saying this person has been doing everything and you want to introduce a sentence variety that allows you to say something was done without specifically identifying the person who did it, that allows you the passive voice. And you would want to do that in situations when you want to minimize the finger pointing of who did the action, as well as sometimes you may want to just have that basic understanding of, focus on the action. Because there are times when who did the action is not important. The fact that the action was done, that is what the most important thing is. In which case, passive voice would be better because you want readers to focus on the action and not focus on the person who is doing the action. So these are the reasons why passive voice is important to note, and why you should really look into checking whether or not your child is using passive voice, if they're using it correctly, and how to get them to use it in a way that enhances their writing. Okay. So, and I say check because many times students learn writing skills, or based on their reading and interactions, they perform certain activities in their writing, but they're not aware of it. Because I've had students, I've read their writing and I see they use the passive voice, but they don't know it by name to say this is passive or active, and they don't know how to deliberately use it. So they use it in writing because they're accustomed to writing and things are said and it comes out that way. But they don't know how to deliberately do it where they decide, I am going to use passive voice here because it works better. Now, that is the kind of control over their writing you want to get your students to eventually. You want to get your child making decisions as a writer to enhance their writing in particular ways. So it's not just about they know this and they do it or they memorize something. You really want them to be aware of what they're writing so that they could make better choices with their writing. And that is where the confidence and control over writing would come in, and that allows students to make informed decisions and be more mindful and aware of what level they are writing at. Now, of course, that's a process and it's not going to happen overnight, and we gradually get the students into it. But like I said, that whole thing about passive and active voice, that is part of it. And certainly you can go online and find additional information in general where passive and active voice is concerned. If you want to get information directly on passive and active voice as they relate to the report writing for SEA, then you could get a copy of my series, which would give you the introduction to active and passive voice, an activity that would help students relate to active and passive voice more directly, as well as the practice and reinforcement that they would need to, really get into the use of active and passive voice. So, um, I someone put in the chat useful information. You're welcome, and thank you for saying that, because every week I say, please put comments in the chat so I know that I'm not speaking to myself. So I really do appreciate that. Thank you so very much. And so we can wrap that with the report writing, active and passive voice. We will do a little bit more about that next week, so that this week and next week, your agenda for report writing, let me just go back to the schedule. And like I said, if you have the schedule, then please review it and you can go through with following along with the schedule, and you're building on the skills as you go, so that the next 2 weeks, this week and next week, we're working with the active and passive voice, making sure students understand what it is, how to use it, so you can change active to passive voice and vice versa, and better be able to recognize it in writing so that they'd be able to use it in a more direct and deliberate way. And following that, we will go back to reviewing the schedules and the checklists and so on. But at this point, 2 weeks of review with active and passive voice. So you want to deal with worksheets, checklists, worksheets, practice activities. And the philosophy is first, of course, present information, reinforce the information, then you check understanding before students are going to be working independently on their own with their own worksheets. So we do have 2 weeks of that. You're spending, I would say, let's say maybe like half an hour, 3 times a week, working on the active and passive voice with the worksheets. And of course, if you have scheduled worksheets, then that is awesome. If you don't, um, my text, or you could go online to get some activities that would be really helpful with that. Okay, so we'll close off reports at this point and then shift over to the narrative writing. In narrative writing, we're looking at climax, right? So far, what we've done is that we've looked at the different types of stories, how to organize ideas. We've spoken about that 12-point plot development that I do encourage you to get a copy of the poster, get a copy of the worksheets, um, the flashcards that I have, because you see, plot. And the reason I haven't finished the text yet, but I made sure, to get the plot diagram and everything done, is because plot is like the core of the narrative writing. And there are students who are quite skillful with their writing, but the plot gives them some trouble, and therefore they don't score well. And for students who are not as skillful with their writing and they're struggling understanding and organizing, that 12-point plot development shows them where to begin, what to do next. And so they have a structure that they can work with to develop their writing. So understanding plot, I've been saying this and I will continue saying it. It is important, very, very important for students to really get that idea and memorize that development. So this presents it in a way that they have that step by step and that structure, but also the reinforcement of it helps them internalize it. Because the plan is we're not really expecting students to implement this 12 point by writing out points 1 to 12 and plotting their story like that at the exam. They're doing that now so that they can memorize it and internalize it. But by the time they get to the exam, it's going to be in here so that they will be able to do annotations on their prompts and therefore do the planning really quickly because the ideas are here, the structure is here, so they can do that note form planning and have all the structure that they need to really plan effectively and write really great narratives. So, Climax, if you missed last session, I would advise you to go to that session where we spoke a lot more about what Climax is and how to recognize it, what it's supposed to be, and some of the things that students can do to really make it exciting and energizing. Because, yes, it is really meant to be the most exciting part of the story. Today, I want to focus on getting that to that point of climax. I mentioned it last week and I know I've said it before, but today is the day that I really want to focus on that gap between conflict and the climax. So that, again, just as with report writing, you don't want your child or your students just to have the information and, just throw it onto the page. You want them to have the skill and the ability to choose and be deliberate about what they're writing. I've had students tell me, and I ask all the time, my students, I really do drill it in them. You need a reason for this. Why did you do this? Why did you do that? Um, Even with comprehension, why do you do this, why do you do that? So the idea is that writers need to have reasons for what they are writing. We're not just putting in all the skills and shaking it up and emptying it onto the page, so that we have all the elements. But then what's the structure, what's the purpose, where's the direction, how do we develop what's going on? Do we know or does it just kind of happen? Again, because we're dealing with an exam, we don't want students to be writing and things just happening, because in the exam, examiners are going to be looking for specific things. They're going to be looking for specific skills and strategies. And just like with the report writing, students who perform at the expected level will get proficient. Students who perform at above the expected level will get exemplary. And when I say above the expected level, it's not a matter of, okay, we're setting up these students to only be proficient. The idea is if you know what to do and you do it okay, then you're proficient. And that is the expectations, that students will know what to do in terms of writing a narrative or a report, and they will be able to perform at that level to show, hey, they know what to do. But when it comes to writing, we also are practicing several other skills, not just knowing what to do in terms of that beginning, middle, end. We are also looking at the descriptive writing, we're looking at the vivid imagery, we're looking at figurative language, and all these other things. So, helping a student, flourish and express ideas in creative ways helps a lot. And that is where you get to that 18 to 20, because now students are not just, you know, taking this and putting it here, and we see that they can't do that. What we want to do is see some flair in, the description and the presentation of the material. Bridging that gap between the height of the conflict and climax is one of those skills that shows students are very deliberate and they are more in control of their writing, and the story is not in control of them, right? So, because, students, they get the idea and then they write, and who's being graded here? The story or you? What exactly are you presenting? The whole idea is that you need to present your skills as a writer. Whether it's a narrative or a report, you are presenting your skill as a writer. So then what do you need to do in order to present your skill as a writer? Demonstrate your ability to do certain things. So here's the issue with the gap between the conflict and climax. The main conflict, and I'm saying main here because remember, in a narrative, we're building rising action. And in building that rising action, what you're looking at is conflict beginning at a point and then becoming much more intense as we continue with the story until the conflict peaks and it gets really overwhelming for the main character. That is the height of the conflict, and that is where we would look at having the main conflict, because this is a point where characters cannot go any further because of the conflict. They're stuck because of the conflict. So that is the height of the conflict. Now, at that point, a character is supposed to be so overwhelmed, so distressed, so wrought with anxiety or fear or whatever is happening in the situation that they cannot move forward in the story. They will not be able to take the next step. They will not be able to really get into the situation of accomplishing their goal without help. So your character must get help. And of course, there are skills and strategies for getting that help, but we do need to recognize that the character must get help. Where the help comes from would vary, but the character should not be able to move on without that help. So when you look at that 12-point plot development, there is a point on that diagram that bridges the gap between the height of the conflict and the climax. And that is something that students need to really learn more about, and they really do need to be able to master getting that help for the main character. And the only way they can actually reach to that point is if their conflict is strong enough. And this is one of the challenges with not getting to the point where you have that kind of bridging of the gap. I call it the intervention. We don't get to that point where students need to demonstrate there's an intervention simply because the conflict is not strong enough. So then we have to go back to conflict and check, is my conflict strong enough? Why is it my characters seem to just be breezing through life and they figure things out so easily on their own? That is going to be okay for a narrative, but it's not going to give you the strength in the narrative to get that exemplary point where you can really see those 18 to 20s happening, right? So we do need to intensify the conflict in order to bring it to a point where the characters are really struggling to they cannot move forward on their own. And then something has to happen to really help them get to that point. So that's what we're referring to as the intervention. That is what we're referring to as the bridge in the gap for the between the conflict and the climax. And as I've just explained, there's a little bit more to it than just simply getting help. In order to get to that point, conflict has to be intense and strong enough. And then, in order to move from that point, students really do need to understand how to develop that intervention and how to connect it with the climax. And of course, they are going to need to understand climax very much in detail so that when they get to the climax actually feels like a process, feels like something that is happening. So those are the skills that need to be demonstrated at this point, and that is what I recommend working on with your child or your students this week. And I think next week, according to this schedule, we're going on to lesson learned and the resolution. um, those things have a lot to do with the climax and the conflict and the beginning of the story, which is the character's goals. So these are all things that students need to be able to understand and then demonstrate an understanding of at this point. So even though right now we're going through each point individually, remember, the narrative, when you write it and the students write, you're bringing it together and demonstrating how all of these things interact. So we're pausing to make sure students recognize each section, in which case you would definitely want to review last week's session, which spoke about what the climax is, and a couple of sessions before that when we spoke about the conflict, different types of conflict, and how important that expression of conflict is. We get the rising action. We looked at the plotting stories and identifying how all of these things are connected up to this point, which is the high point of the story where we get to the climax. And next week, we would be looking at the resolution, lesson learned, and how we get from the climax to this resolution and lesson learned. So we are looking at the structure of the story, focusing a lot on that plot, and then we're identifying each section of the plot to make sure students are able to know what it is and how to demonstrate it. And then from there, we will be getting into descriptions with the character and setting and all the things that fill out the story to help the story feel more vibrant, alive, exciting, which is where you will get that 18 to 20. All right. So that's really what I wanted to share with you today about the narrative writing. So the whole point of your week and practice this week is ensuring that students recognize that at the height of the conflict, things have to be so bad for the main character that they cannot just figure out stuff on their own. Something must happen to help them. And so ideally, you want to go through reading some stories, looking at how things changed, when they changed, how exactly did the main character figure out to get to the climax, and then how exactly did the climax unfold. Because the climax is not just a single action, as we discussed last week. The climax is actually the process of accomplishing the goal. And that should be a process in order for the story to really feel exciting and for readers to feel satisfied with the story. You want to get it to that point of being, you know, that it like have a few step by steps, at least three. I would say three things must happen in part of the process to accomplish the goal. So if it's a fight, there has to be at least 3 points on the fight worth mentioning. If it's like, doing an activity, at least 3 points in the activity. Now, three is pretty much an arbitrary number at this point. It could be more than that. I say minimum three because other than that, it's not going to really feel, as active. So I'm giving a minimum of three, but I'm not saying only three. Because remember, what we're looking at is not having a student do exactly as they're told. We want students to understand the skills and know how to use it so that they can make choices that benefit the story and demonstrate their skills as writers. Okay, so we're looking really at getting into a lot more details on that. Um, so, like I said, what I have right now is that plot development that is available with the flashcards. I am going to be making them available. If you want to get a copy of those, um, send me a WhatsApp message 717-4993. You can message me on Facebook. Um, reach out and let me know that you want to get a copy. What you would be getting for the narratives, if you get a copy of um the materials, is a poster that shows, uh, let me see, I have a copy here. So it's a poster that shows the 12-point plot development. You would also be getting flashcards that explain each of the 12 points. And today I'll be finishing up those, doing videos with explanations of each of the points and how to use the 12-point worksheet as you are making sure your students understand, or your child understands, how to really process a story in their mind to beginning, rising action, climax, and resolution. So there's a movement, and the short videos that I'd be doing for each of the 12 points plus the worksheet, and you'd also be getting a digital download of the worksheet. Um, so that you could, print it as needed as you practice, so that your child or your students can really engage with plot, learn it inside out, so that when it comes to their own writing, they would have the structure in their mind that quick notes would be all that is necessary to guide them. All right. So if you have any questions about the plot, about the active and passive voice, please be sure to send me a message. Let me know if you have any questions about the report writing process, what students need to know, or the narrative writing process, what students need to know. Then, of course, feel free to send me a message and I would respond as best as I can. Let's see, one more thing before I go. I'm in the process of settling my dates for the July August vacation practice that I would be doing with students. I'd be working on both narratives and reports during sessions so that we'd be covering both bases. So I'm still kind of working out the time. I had a little adjustment to make at the beginning. So, and some personal issues, and so I have to do a little bit of rearranging, but I'll be settling that this week. So be sure to check in SEA Peaceful Approach, as well as check in with the Word Coach Youth. I'll be posting registration forms there, as well as cost and everything, because I know planning ahead is important. We talk a lot about planning, especially where writing is concerned. So I'd be able to give you much more details on that. Today's Tuesday. So by Friday, that's the aim to get it up. But certainly by the next live, which is next week, Tuesday, you would have the information about that vacation, the vacation schedule that I'll be working with. All right. So thank you for those of you who were able to stay with the live today. I know for many people the 11 to 12 is a bit of a ticklish time, but of course the recordings are there. So even for those of you who um you got the live today, let's say there's something that you didn't get chance to take a note of, or you couldn't remember exactly, the recordings are all there on my Facebook page with Coach Youth. They will be in SEA, the Peacefield Approach, in the video section. They're also on my website, and they would be available on YouTube as well. So if you want to share with people who are not on Facebook, and as I understand, there are quite a few people who just don't really care for Facebook, that's fine. You can send them the link to my website where all the videos are there archived, or you can send them the link to YouTube where they can go back and get the previous videos so that they can, move forward with that reinforcement, learning the strategies as we go. If you're just getting started, that's fine. There's still enough time. We're in episode 11. So that means if you do um, two a week between now and by the end of August, you'd be up to speed, you know, pretty much closing in on getting all the skills that are necessary. And of course, please do check in with me if you need any further information about the materials that you can use to practice. So when I come on, I will share certain things, and then of course you can, once you have access to the materials afterward, you could do the follow up and do the reinforcement as necessary. Okay. So, do have a wonderful rest of today, and I encourage you to keep up with the practice, share, like, let me know what's useful, what information you still need. Okay. Have a wonderful rest of today, as I said, and see you next week, Tuesday. Bye bye.